The road is still wet with morning. Mist clings low to the stones. A cart creaks in the distance. No one speaks. Along the roadside, bodies hang in rigid silence. Some still breathe. Some are already still. The air carries iron and salt. Birds hop closer, then back again. Travellers pass without stopping. A man adjusts his cloak. A child stares too long before being turned away. The message is not whispered. It is nailed into wood and flesh. This is what happens when you forget who owns the world. What you're about to hear is not a story about battle. It's about display, about a civilization that mastered law, engineering, architecture, and the theatre of punishment. Ancient Rome did not simply defeat its enemies, it staged them. It arranged suffering so that it could be seen, absorbed, remembered. Not in secret prisons, in public squares, along highways, inside arenas built for spectacle. Why would a society so proud of its order invest so much effort in humiliation? Because Rome understood something unsettling. Power is most secure when it is performed. To understand how that performance worked, you have to understand the scale. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched from the cold edges of Britannia to the deserts near Mesopotamia. Tens of millions lived under its authority. Messages could not travel instantly. Armies could not be everywhere at once. Control required something else. Fear made visible. Roman law divided the world with precision. Citizen and non-citizen. Free and enslaved. Rebel and loyalist. Each category carried its own punishments, carefully codified. Executions were not random bursts of cruelty. They followed scripts. There were approved methods, approved audiences, approved meanings. Amphitheaters rose across the empire. Stone rings designed not only for sport, but for demonstration. Triumphs wound through city streets in choreographed processions. Roads connected provinces, not just for trade, but for communication of consequence. Rome did not hide its punishments, it curated them. And when the empire chose to make an example of someone, it did so with patience. Consider a young woman in North Africa in the early 3rd century. She was educated, from a respected family, newly a mother. She lived in Carthage, a city long absorbed into Roman power, yet still carrying its own deep history. Her crime was simple. She refused to perform a ritual, not a violent act, not conspiracy, a gesture. A pinch of incense burned before the emperor's image, a public acknowledgement that Rome stood above all. For most, it was a formality. For her, it was betrayal of conscience. Refusal placed her outside the boundary of obedience. And once outside, the machinery moved. She was imprisoned, questioned, pressured. Her father visited. He pleaded not as a citizen defending law, but as a parent terrified of losing a daughter. Think of your child, he told her. Think of us. Think of survival. The authorities offered a way back in. Perform the ritual. Go home. Raise your son. 5 seconds of compliance in exchange for a lifetime. She declined. Rome could have executed her quietly. A swift beheading. A closed door. Instead, her death was scheduled as part of public games. The arena was already familiar to the crowd. They had seen criminals, prisoners of war, and condemned slaves brought onto the sand. The audience knew when to cheer, when to gasp, when to look away. But this was different. She was not a thief or a murderer. She was a young mother who would not bend. On the day of the games, she and others like her were led into the amphitheater. The crowd roared, not always in hatred, sometimes in anticipation. They were there for spectacle. The empire provided it. Animals were released, chaos followed. What mattered was not only the physical suffering, it was the transformation. Rome intended to strip away identity, to recast a mother as a traitor, a believer as a criminal, to show that private conviction dissolved under public force. Yet something complicated the script. Accounts suggest that even wounded, even facing death, she reached for others beside her, helped them stand, composed herself. Rome's design was humiliation. What emerged instead was defiance without violence. Her execution ended her life. It did not end her influence. Stories circulated, writings survived. Communities repeated her name. The attempt to turn her into a warning gradually turned her into a symbol. Rome's performance had produced an unintended result, but not every story bent that way. Decades earlier, far to the north, a different kind of threat had risen. A chieftain among the tribes of Gaul managed what Rome had long feared: unity. For years, Roman generals had exploited divisions among the tribes. Rivalries made conquest manageable. But this leader convinced them to act together, to burn their own supplies rather than let Rome seize them, to fight strategically rather than impulsively. He studied Roman tactics, he adapted, and for a moment, he forced one of Rome's most ambitious commanders into real difficulty. The rebellion culminated in a siege. Roman forces constructed vast lines of fortifications around a hilltop stronghold. Then, anticipating relief forces, they built a second ring facing outward. 2 walls, one trapping those inside, one defending against those outside. Starvation followed. The rebel leader faced a decision: continue resisting and watch his people die slowly, or surrender himself in hope of mercy for them. He chose surrender. Sources describe him riding out in armor, laying down his weapons before the Roman general, a gesture heavy with symbolism. Dignity offered in exchange for survival of others. His warriors were spared. He was not. He was transported to Rome and placed in a state prison beneath the city. Not executed immediately, not forgotten, preserved for years. Why wait? Because Rome understood timing. A triumph, the grand parade celebrating a general's victory, required a centerpiece: captured wealth, exotic animals, and a defeated enemy of stature. When the general finally returned to Rome in glory, the streets filled. Senators, citizens, foreigners, crowds packed together to witness power embodied. The captive leader was brought out in chains, once a symbol of resistance, now a prop in a narrative written by his conqueror. He walked the route past cheering spectators, past monuments to Roman greatness, past the very institutions that legitimized his defeat. He did not speak. He was not permitted to frame his own story. At the procession's end, while feasts and sacrifices celebrated victory above ground, he was led below. There, away from the spectacle but inseparable from it, he was executed. The timing was precise, his death synchronized with celebration. The message was complete. Rebellion ends not only in defeat, but in erasure. And then there were the nameless, thousands of enslaved people who had followed a former gladiator in revolt. They had crossed Italy, defeating legions, exposing cracks in Roman confidence. For 2 years, they moved like a shadow army. When they were finally crushed, Rome did not bury them anonymously. Crucifixion was chosen, not in a hidden field, along a major road stretching south from the capital, cross after cross after cross. The condemned were spaced deliberately, forming a corridor of agony. Travellers entering the city encountered the display long before reaching its gates. Death came slowly. Days, sometimes longer. The purpose was not efficiency, it was instruction. Anyone considering rebellion would remember the sight. Anyone already enslaved would understand the cost. This was policy, not impulse. Roman thinkers debated punishment openly. Some argued that public suffering reinforced social cohesion, that witnessing consequences strengthened loyalty among citizens, that fear, properly managed, stabilized the state. They believed humiliation could be engineered. And in many ways, they were correct. The empire endured for centuries, but there was a psychological toll. For the victims, humiliation cut deeper than physical pain. To be stripped, exposed, mocked before a crowd is to have identity dismantled in real time. For the audience, repetition numbed empathy. What shocks at first becomes routine. Children grew up attending games, Vendors sold food. Applause followed executions. Normalization is quiet. It does not announce itself. It accumulates. Rome's system relied on that accumulation. Not every citizen approved. Some writers expressed discomfort with the excesses of the arena. Some emperors restricted certain displays, yet the structure remained. Because spectacle worked, it communicated across language barriers, across provinces, across social classes. You did not need to read Latin to understand a body on a cross. You did not need legal training to interpret chains in a triumph. The empire's genius was not only in conquest, it was in narrative control. By staging punishment, Rome claimed moral authority. Rebels were labelled criminals. Refusal became treason. Resistance became disorder. The line between justice and intimidation blurred. And still, memory slipped through. The young mother's story survived in writings copied by later generations. The rebel leader's name resurfaced centuries later as a symbol of national identity in lands once subdued. The crucified thousands, though largely nameless, became shorthand for the cost of challenging empire. Rome attempted erasure. History preserved fragments. There is a temptation to treat this as distant brutality, an ancient flaw corrected by progress. But the mechanics deserve scrutiny. Public punishment magnifies impact. It transforms an individual's fate into communal lesson. It binds spectators together in shared witnessing, sometimes through empathy, often through complicity. When humiliation becomes normalized, the threshold for outrage shifts. Rome did not invent cruelty. Many societies before and after have practiced it. What made Rome distinctive was its integration of spectacle into governance. Amphitheaters were not side projects. They were infrastructure. Triumphs were not spontaneous celebrations. They were statecraft. Crucifixions along highways were not chaotic massacres. They were strategic warnings. The empire projected permanence, stone roads, aqueducts, laws that influenced legal systems millennia later. Yet beneath the marble was something colder, an understanding that fear, displayed carefully, could hold vast territories together. Eventually, Rome's political structures fractured. External pressures mounted. Internal instability grew. The amphitheaters did not prevent decline. The crosses rotted, the prisons emptied, the roads remained. What lingers is not only the architecture, but the question. How far can a society go in the name of order before it reshapes its own conscience? The young mother who would not burn incense, the chieftain who surrendered to save his people, the enslaved rebels who lined a road in death. Rome intended them as warnings. Instead, they became mirrors. They reveal how systems can rationalize degradation, how law can coexist with cruelty, how spectators can adapt to almost anything if it is presented often enough. Their stories endure because someone recorded them, because memory resisted complete control. If this history unsettles you, that reaction matters. It means the spectacle no longer feels normal. There are countless other names lost to dust, individuals whose suffering was never written down. Remembering even a few pushes back against the silence that power prefers. If you value deeply researched explorations of the past, stories that examine not just what happened, but why it happened, consider subscribing. And tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you, which figure you think history misunderstood, which era we should examine next. Because history is not only a record of empires, it is a record of choices, and the way we remember them shapes the world we build now.